an immediate ceasefire. And that someone is France and Egypt. So where's the so-called leader of the free world in all this? The Bush administration says it supports this new initiative, while at the same time not exactly supporting the whole point of the initiative. You know, that part about the immediate ceasefire. Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice hedged on the issue at the United Nations today, saying instead, quote, "We need urgently to conclude a ceasefire that can endure." So once again, with less than 2 weeks left of the Bush presidency, it's time for the Rachel Maddow Show's Lame Duck Watch, because somebody's really, really got to do it. So the president did not comment on Gaza for over a week. He isn't leading any international peace efforts, and he isn't really backing the only peace effort out there, at least really enthusiastically backing it. Despite the fact that President Bush says he listens to what al-Qaeda says in the war on terror, and Ayman al-Zawahiri called for Muslims to attack Western interests in retaliation for Gaza, and despite the fact that President Bush says we need to win the hearts and minds in Afghanistan, where the Washington Post reports today that religious leaders and civilians alike are blaming both us, the U.S. and Israel, for the crisis, while we have tens of thousands of American troops stationed in their country. So you'd think that it would be in our best interest to be seen to be helping to resolve the conflict in Gaza. Why aren't we doing more? Joining us now is Democratic Nebraska Senator Ben Nelson, who's a member of the Senate Armed Services Committee. Senator Nelson, thank you so much for coming on the show tonight.
Thank you, Rachel.
As a little background, let me just show our viewers a little bit of the geography of the Gaza Strip. They've got the Mediterranean Sea as their western border, Israel on the north and east, and Egypt, which has closed its borders to Palestinian refugees. To the south, the fighting is all happening in an incredibly small, densely populated place. The residents there don't have anywhere to go. Refugees sought shelter at that UN school in Gaza, which was hit with mortar shells today, killing at least 40 Palestinians. I should report that it's been noted that Israel was acting in self-defense. With all of this happening, with all of these details, with the situation seemingly dire and not ending, why isn't the U.S. doing more to end this conflict?
Well, you know, we've been rather silent, I think, throughout a lot of the challenges between the Palestinians and Israel. We pushed for an election, and what a premature act that was, because Hamas got elected. This administration has equated democracy with having elections. You cannot have a democracy where one of the parties running has a militia. And so consequently, I think we've made probably as many mistakes there as you could count.
Does that mean, though, that it's not a democracy in Iraq because of the Sadrists who are in the Iraqi parliament and the Mahdi army militia? It seems like we've got ideas about how these countries ought to be comporting themselves, and we get upset about the results, but the rules that we ask them to play by don't seem all that consistent.
Well, I think there needs to be a consistency that you can't have a political party or a group running for office that has a militia. It just can't happen. The Republicans can't have a militia in Washington. The Democrats can't have a militia in Washington, and for good reason. And that's part of the problem that we have in the Middle East. Now, what I think we're seeing is some consistency on that, but after the fact, because we've equated elections with democracy. And if you don't have the political infrastructure, the judiciary, sound and infrastructure that goes along with it, including laws, human rights laws and others, you're not going to really have a democracy, not the kind that the American people envision.
When thinking about the crisis in Gaza and how long this is going to go on and how much blood is going to be shed there, is there a point at which the United States would ever tell Israel that we did not want them to do what they are doing? Is there a point diplomatically where the U.S. would say that we disagree with Israel's tactics?
We've had a partnership with Israel for a long time, but in that partnership, Israel has certain rights that they can exercise. And so I think perhaps there would be a discussion about it, but I don't think we're in a position to tell them what to do or what not to do. But certainly discussions and consultation, those have to occur for a partnership to succeed.
Whether or not the U.S. government will ever advise Israel as to what they can or cannot do, there's also the issue of what the Palestinians are going through. Could you ever imagine a circumstance in which the U.S., for example, would be working on helping to make that humanitarian corridor for Gaza residents come into being, where we would help on setting up and defending refugee camps, for example?
Well, I think there ought to be humanitarian efforts made by the United Nations and by other nations as well to try to deal with some of the challenges that are there that are human, and but I think we could do that. I don't think there's anything that would prohibit us from doing that, and I think that there would be some support for it. The challenge here is what kind of humanitarian aid and where do you go? The bombing of the schools right now seems to be, at least the argument is made. I haven't seen the evidence, but the argument's made that those schools were repositories for military equipment and were used to fire rockets out of Gaza into the Israeli territories. This last year, I was down at Sderot and saw the remains of rockets, one after another, that have been fired on that small community right next to Gaza. So this is a very difficult situation to deal with. There are those who would like to conclude that it's one side or the other. This has been going on for centuries, but I do think it begs for peace, and I hope that there will be some sort of an effort to really establish and I would agree with Condoleezza Rice, an enduring peace process, because if we don't have a truce that's enduring, this will continue to go on as it has over these last several years.
Nebraska Democratic Senator Ben Nelson, member of the Senate Armed Services Committee, a thorough demonstration from you tonight about the fact that there's really no difference between Democrats and Republicans on the issue of Israel right now. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, sir.
Thank you, Rachel.
Coming up on Countdown with Keith Olbermann starts right now. Good night.